The reality of this shocking story begins, and we see we're at the center of the story. Two people whose lives became inextricably interconnected. Sophia Smith, a 32-year-old English professor at Briarcliff Community College, was known for her brilliant mind and captivating lectures. Arthur, a struggling freshman with dreams of becoming a writer, was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. What began his mentorship slowly twisted into a web of manipulation, desire, and ultimately murder. As investigators peeled back the layers of their relationship, they uncovered a dark tale of exploitation, obsession, twisted fantasies, and deadly desperation. Sophia Gosling's journey to Briarcliff was paved with academic accolades and personal turmoil born to wealthy parents in Boston. Sophia showed early signs of exceptional intelligence. Her father, a stern investment banker, and her mother, a socialite with a penchant for cocktails, provided Sophia with every material advantage, but little emotional support. From a young age, Sophia learned to use her intellect as a shield, burying herself in books to escape the cold reality of her home life. She excelled in school, skipping 2 grades and entering Harvard. It was there that Sophia discovered her passion for English literature and her talent for captivating an audience after completing her PhD at Yale. Sophia seemed destined for a prestigious position at an Ivy League institution. However, a scandal involving an affair with her married thesis advisor derailed those plans. The academic community's whispered judgments and thinly veiled rejection drove Sophia to seek refuge in the small town of Briarcliff at Briarcliff Community College. Sophia quickly established herself as a rising star. Her lectures on Renaissance literature and modern poetry drew students from other departments, and her innovative teaching methods earned her the admiration of both colleagues and students. Dr. Smith was the epitome of success, brilliant, beautiful, and dedicated to her craft. But beneath the polished exterior lay a woman haunted by her past and driven by an insatiable need for validation. Sophia's relationships were often intense but short-lived, leaving her feeling empty and misunderstood. She craved the adoration of her students, basking in their admiration and subtly encouraging their dependence on her guidance. A psychological evaluation conducted after her arrest would later reveal a complex personality disorder, characterizing by narcissistic traits and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. It was this dangerous cocktail of intelligence, charisma, and unresolved emotional issues that set the stage for her fateful encounter with Zane and him. Sophia saw not just another student to mold, but a chance to reclaim the youth and passion she felt. Slipping away, Zane's path to Briarcliff Community College was far from typical, born in a working-class neighborhood. Arthur was the youngest of 4. Were children in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father, a construction worker, spent long hours on job sites while his mother juggled multiple part-time jobs to keep food on the table from an early age. Arthur found solace in the world of books, while his siblings excelled in sports and practical skills. Arthur was the dreamer of the family. He would often be found scribbling stories in tattered notebooks or lost in the pages of worn paperbacks borrowed from the local library. Arthur's high school years were marked by academic inconsistency. Brilliant in subjects that captured his imagination like English and history, he struggled with the rigid structures of math and science. His guidance counselor, Ms. Ramirez, recalled, "Arthur had a spark of genius when it came to writing, but he lacked the discipline and confidence to truly shine." Despite his potential, Arthur's grades were mediocre, and his SAT scores fell short of his aspirations. The rejection letters from his dream colleges were a bitter pill to swallow. But beneath Arthur's artistic temperament lay a young man grappling with self-doubt and a desperate need for validation. It was this combination of raw talent, emotional vulnerability, and a burning desire to prove himself that made Arthur the perfect target for Sophia Gosling's manipulation in her. He saw not just a mentor, but a gateway to the intellectual and artistic world he so desperately wanted to join as the fall semester began. Arthur could never have imagined that his pursuit of literary greatness would lead him down a dark path of ethical compromises, emotional entanglement, and ultimately to the shores of Lake Briarcliff, where his young life would be cut tragically short. The first day of advanced composition class was a turning point in both Sophia and Zane's lives. Though neither could have predicted the tragic course their paths would take, Sophia, impeccably dressed in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, commanded the room with her presence. Her eyes scanned the sea of fresh faces, pausing momentarily on Zane, hunched in the back row, nervously fiddling with his pen. As Sophia launched into her introductory lecture on the power of narrative, Arthur found himself captivated. Her words seemed to speak directly to him, igniting a passion he had long kept buried when she asked the class to share their favorite authors. Arthur surprised himself by raising his hand. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke of his admiration for James Baldwin, earning an approving nod from Sophia after class. Sophia approached Arthur. She'd been impressed by his insight and encouraged him to consider submitting work to the college literary magazine. Arthur flushed with pride, stammered his thanks. This brief interaction planted the seeds of what would become a dangerous obsession for both of them over the next few weeks. Arthur became a fixture in Sophia's office hours. What began as discussions about assignments gradually evolved into deep conversations about literature, life, and Arthur's aspirations. Sophia, recognizing Arthur's raw talent and vulnerability, began to subtly shape their interactions. She would lean in closely when reviewing his work, her perfume lingering in the air. Her feedback was a careful mix of praise and criticism, designed to keep Arthur constantly seeking her approval. She shared personal anecdotes, creating an illusion of intimacy that blurred the lines of the student-teacher relationship. Zay's classmate Amelia later told investigators, "We all noticed how Dr. Smith treated Arthur differently. At first we were just jealous of the attention. But looking back, there was something off about it. As midterms approached, Arthur was struggling in his other classes. The pressure to maintain his scholarship weighed heavily on him, sensing his distress. Sophia made her first overt move after a particularly long office meeting. She placed her hand on Zay's arm and spoke softly. "I see so much potential in Zay. I'd hate to see it go to waste because of a few difficult classes, perhaps. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement to ensure your success." Arthur, naive and desperate to prove himself, failed to recognize the dangerous territory he was entering. He interpreted Sophia's offer as a lifeline, a chance to focus on his true passion without the fear of losing his scholarship. As autumn painted the Briarcliff campus in shades of gold and red, Sophia and Arthur's relationship intensified. She invited him to exclusive literary events, introducing him to her colleagues as a promising protege. Arthur, intoxicated by this new world of intellectual stimulation and perceived belonging, began to rely on Sophia for more than just academic guidance. Sophia, for her part, reveled in Arthur's dependence. She carefully crafted every interaction to deepen his emotional attachment, while maintaining plausible deniability to her colleagues. She was merely nurturing a gifted student. To Arthur, she became the center of his world. By the time the fall semester was coming to a close, the boundary between mentor and student had become irrevocably blurred. Arthur's writing, once filled with diverse influences, now mimicked Sophia's style and preferences. His social circle had shrunk, with more and more of his time devoted to extra study sessions with Dr. Gosling. Neither Arthur nor Sophia fully realized the dangerous web they were weaving. As the winter break approached, their relationship teetered on the brink of a precipice, ready to plunge into depths from which there would be no return. The winter break marked a critical turning point in Sophia and Arthur's relationship, with the campus largely deserted. They found themselves drawn into a vortex of intensifying emotions and crossed boundaries. Sophia, under the guise of providing additional mentorship, invited Arthur to her off-campus apartment to discuss his final paper for her class. The evening began innocently enough, with Sophia serving tea and engaging Arthur in a heated debate about postmodern literature. But as the hours wore on and inhibitions lowered, the atmosphere shifted. Sophia, her voice lowered to a near whisper, began to share personal stories of her own struggles as a young academic. She portrayed herself as a misunderstood genius, persecuted by jealous colleagues and bound by the rigid structures of academia. Arthur, already in awe of Sophia's intellect, found himself drawn deeper into her world. He saw in her a kindred spirit, someone who truly understood the artist's struggle. When Sophia's hand brushed against his, the electric charge between them was undeniable. What happened next would be a point of contention in the later investigation. Sophia claimed that Arthur initiated the kiss, overcome by youthful passion. Arthur, in his final statement, insisted that Sophia had orchestrated the entire evening to this end. Regardless of who made the first move that night, marked the beginning of a physical relationship that would have devastating consequences as the new semester began. Sophia and Arthur's secret affair intensified. 150 destined meetings in her office turned into long weekends at secluded bed and breakfasts. Sophia showered Arthur with gifts, rare books, expensive pens, a laptop to replace his outdated model. She framed each gift as an investment in his future, as a writer further binding him to her. Zane's grades, which had been middling in his other classes, suddenly skyrocketed. Sophia used her influence to intervene on his behalf with other professors, painting him as a misunderstood genius who simply needed the right guidance. She promised Arthur that with her help, he could secure a spot in a prestigious MFA program, bypassing the usual requirements. But as Arthur's dependence on Sophia grew, so did his anxiety. The initial thrill of their forbidden romance began to give way to guilt and fear of discovery. His writing, once vibrant and unique, became a pale imitation of Sophia's style. His few remaining friends noticed his increasing isolation and erratic behavior. Sophia, sensing Zay's unease, doubled down on her manipulation. She alternated between lavish praise and cruel criticism, keeping Arthur in a constant state of emotional turmoil. She convinced him that their relationship was special, a meeting of twin souls that the ordinary world could never understand. In a particularly chilling move, Sophia began to insinuate that Arthur's success was entirely dependent on her goodwill. During one tense encounter in her office, she casually remarked, "It would be a shame if the ethics board were to investigate the sudden improvement in your grades. They might get the wrong idea about how you've been earning them." The implied thread was clear. Arthur, trapped between his ambition and his growing sense of moral unease, began to withdraw into himself. His journal entries from this period, later recovered by investigators, paint a picture of a young man in deep emotional distress. February 15th. I don't know who I am anymore. Everything I've achieved feels tainted, but how can something so wrong feel so necessary? March 3rd. E says she's the only one who truly understands me. Maybe she's right. The thought of losing her terrifies me more than anything. As spring bloomed on the Briarcliff campus, the web of lies and manipulation had grown so thick that Arthur could scarcely remember his life before Sophia. His family, worried by his increasingly infrequent calls, home planned a surprise visit. Sophia, paranoid about discovery, forced Arthur to rebuff them, causing a painful rift. It was during this time that Arthur began to confine in his roommate Trevor. While he didn't reveal the full extent of his relationship with Sophia, he shared enough for Trevor to become deeply concerned. Trevor's worried glances and pointed questions about Arthur's relationship with Dr. Gosling would later prove to be the thread that would begin to unravel the whole sordid affair. As the semester neared its end, the pressure on both Sophia and Arthur intensified. Their relationship, built on a foundation of manipulation and false promises, was beginning to crack under the weight of its own contradictions. Neither could have predicted the violent culmination that lay just around the corner, a tragic end to a romance that should never have begun. The catalyst for the tragic events that followed came in the form of a seemingly innocuous email. Dr. Fiona Sullivan, the Dean of Liberal Arts, reached out to Sophia about Arthur's remarkable academic turnaround, expressing interest in featuring him in a college newsletter for Sophia. This well-intentioned inquiry set off alarm bells. The thought of increased scrutiny on Arthur's achievements filled her with panic in a frenzy. Sophia called Arthur to her office after hours. The tension was palpable as she paced the room, outlining the danger they were in. Zane, already worn down by months of emotional manipulation, felt the last vestiges of his self-worth crumbling. It was in this charged atmosphere that Arthur finally found the courage to confront the reality of their situation. His voice barely above a whisper. He said, "This isn't right, Sophia. What we're doing is destroying me." Sophia's reaction was swift and cruel. Her nurturing facade cracked, revealing the ruthless manipulator beneath. She reminded Arthur of all she had done for him, how his success was entirely due to her influence. In a chilling moment, she asked, "Do you really think you'd be anything without me? You're nothing but a small-town boy with delusions of grandeur. I made you, Arthur." His eyes opened to the toxic nature of their relationship, felt a surge of anger and self-preservation. He shot back this end. "Now I'm going to tell the dean. Everything." The color drained from Sophia's face. Her carefully constructed world teetered on the brink of collapse in a last-ditch effort to maintain control. She alternated between threats and pleas, reminding Arthur of the consequences they would both face if the truth came to light. But something had shifted in Zay. The fog of infatuation and manipulation had lifted, revealing the stark reality of his situation. He turned to leave his hand on the doorknob, when Sophia's voice, now ice-cold, stopped. "Saint him. If you walk out that door, I'll make sure you never write again." Zan paused, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then, without turning back, he walked out, leaving Sophia alone with the ruins of her twisted fantasy. The following days were a blur for both Zay and Sophia. Arthur, emboldened by his decision, confided the full extent of the affair to his roommate Trevor. Together they decided to approach Dean Sullivan with the truth. Sophia, meanwhile, spiraled into panic. She alternated between desperate attempts to contact Arthur and frantic efforts to cover her tracks. She deleted emails, shredded documents, and called in favors from colleagues to vouch for her character as Arthur prepared to meet with the dean. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Sophia's threats echoed in his mind, but he was determined to reclaim his life and his integrity. Little did he know that Sophia, driven to the brink by the imminent exposure of her crimes, was formulating a desperate and deadly plan to silence him forever on the night of the murder. Arthur left the library just after midnight, his mind preoccupied with the meeting he had scheduled with Dean Sullivan the following morning. As he walked along the deserted path that skirted the lake, he failed to notice the figure emerging from the shadows behind him. H. Smith had spent the day in a state of frenzied planning. Her rational mind had been overwhelmed by a toxic mix of fear, rage, and desperation in her distorted reality. Silencing Arthur had become the only way to preserve the life she had built. She had waited for hours, watching the library entrance, a large rock clutched in her trembling hands, as Zay approached a secluded bend in the path. Sophia made her move. The first blow caught Arthur by surprise, sending him stumbling forward. He turned, shock and betrayal etched on his face as he recognized his attacker, Sophia. "I trusted you," he gasped. But Sophia was beyond reason, with a strength born of desperation. With a rock in her hand, she struck again and again while he was on the ground. Zay's attempts to defend himself were weakened by his reluctance to hurt the woman he had once admired and loved in the aftermath of her violent act. Sophia stood frozen, the reality of what she had done crashing over her. The fog seemed to close in, muffling the sound of Arthur's body as it slid down the embankment into the dark waters of the lake with mechanical efficiency. Sophia began to cover her tracks. She gathered Zay's scattered belongings, wiping them clean of fingerprints before tossing them into the water. She scoured the area for any evidence that might link her to the scene. As the first light of dawn began to break through the mist, Sophia made her way back to her apartment. Her clothes sodden and muddied over the next few days, Sophia attempted to maintain a facade of normalcy. She taught her classes, attended faculty meetings, all while battling the internal chaos of her guilt and fear. When Arthur was reported missing, she feigned concern, even joining search parties organized by the college. But the weight of her actions took its toll. Colleagues noted her distracted demeanor and uncharacteristic nervousness. A psychology professor who had known Sophia for years later recalled there was a wildness in her eyes, a tension in her movements. It was as if she was constantly on the verge of flight. Sophia's carefully constructed alibi began to unravel almost immediately. The rock she had used as a weapon, hastily discarded in a dumpster behind her apartment building, was discovered by a maintenance worker's security camera footage placed her car near the lake on the night of Arthur's disappearance, contradicting her claim of being home all night. As the investigation intensified, Sophia's paranoia reached new heights. She became convinced that everyone knew her secret. In a moment of panic, she attempted to flee, hastily packing a bag and withdrawing large sums of cash from her bank account. It was this erratic behavior that ultimately led to her undoing. Arthur's body, weighed down by rocks, was discovered by a group of students on a weekend fishing trip. The grim discovery sent shockwaves through the Briarcliff community and marked the beginning of the end for Sophia Smith. The discovery of Arthur's body transformed the missing person case into a full-blown homicide investigation. Detective Samantha Reeves, a veteran of the Briarcliff Police Department, took charge of the case. Her first steps were to secure